This is a fairly distinguished panel that I hope will be able to get into some pretty broad topics around open, and not just about what open is or how cool open is or how you have to be all open, but really some real world topics around where and how open is being discussed, where and how it's being integrated with existing platforms, and how the consumer might look to that as an opportunity and or as a risk. So many people look at the open space and they think, oh, scary, there's nobody I can call and choke if something goes wrong. Do I need more developers? Is it easy? Do I just download it and start working on it? Is it free? All those answers are no and yes, right? So it's not an easy answer. It depends on your organization, depends on what you're doing with it. It depends on what you're trying to integrate it with and what problem you're trying to solve. And hopefully these folks will be able to answer some of those questions. So really quick, start right here with Justin, a quick introduction.
Hi, Justin Erenkrantz from Bloomberg. I head up our compute architecture team in the CTO office and really responsible for kind of our strategy from everywhere from hardware to operating systems to kind of cloud initiatives to big data to application frameworks, and really trying to understand kind of the transformation of, we talk a lot about kind of permissionless development, and that's really what we're looking to enable across kind of our 4,000 technologists. So just don't even have to ask for permission, do that. And so really kind of a lot of the open source and open standards is really how we're enabling a lot of that change, is basically by being able to build on this kind of infrastructure that's open, we're able to basically go a lot faster.
Calista?
Sure, Calista Redmond. Easy to pick out on the chart up there. So I am the president of the OpenPOWER Foundation. OpenPOWER was started about 3 years ago, and we've progressed from an initial set of 5 members to 205 members. And we've grown from sort of envisioning bringing open source software ideology and meritocracy down into the hardware layers. We've now graduated into actual products and deployments and things of that nature. So we're really excited about the sort of the intersect of multiple open communities. We work very closely across both OpenPOWER and Open Compute, and together with end users as well as technology and software providers. I also have a day job with IBM. And I am the director of global alliances for our OpenPOWER business unit, and we sort of care for many of our strategic relationships around the world.
Cool. Okay.
Name's Okechukwu, Keke. It's a mouthful, so everyone just calls me OK. Solutions architect with Telx. Telx was recently acquired by Digital Realty Trust. So the combined companies are what I would call data center, wholesale data center provider, as well as co-location and interconnection provider across 4 continents with a little over 100 properties under management. My responsibilities are working with enterprise clients to gather requirements, not only around space and power, but where they're going from an IT architecture and how they can leverage kind of the services or solutions we offer, as well as the services provided by providers in our ecosystem, and then how we fall into the, how we play a role in the open concept is working with enterprises, clients like yourself, to see where you are in that kind of journey down the open compute model and how we can help accommodate those needs.
Grant?
Grant Richard, Goldman Sachs. Began my life as a developer. Took about a 25 year detour in infrastructure, and particularly scale infrastructure. I've been involved in large-scale deployments for grid and cloud, data centers, operating systems, just about anything you can name. And I currently am attached to one of the business units for them to focus on moving into the public cloud.
Awesome. So we didn't get a chance to do all the softball questions ahead of time, so hopefully I don't bruise anybody too much. But I'm going to start off with something that I think is relatively easy, if not potentially controversial to some folks. Depending on who you are and how you use an open community, it can either be confusing, helpful, or time-consuming, right? So, and sometimes it can be all 3. Let's just start with you. What's your take? I mean, from a community standpoint, have you worked with one community in particular via, is it Cloud Foundry, is it OpenStack, whatever? And what do you see as the benefits or detractors from having that kind of community and push? Because let's be honest, not every community is completely holistic and just thinking about the buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we at Bloomberg, we have to take a look at, each community kind of independently and say, like, what is the best way to interact with them? Is it through kind of a standards body? Is it through a community? Is it through just pull request on GitHub? What is the right model? And, I think we try at Bloomberg to go to that community on their terms. And so if there is kind of the Cloud Foundry community, we will join that. If, kind of OpenStack, we have been big supporters of OpenStack. And, so I think it's very important for us to kind of understand the community and basically try and show up. And, I don't think we necessarily have a strong preference on, how the community is structured, but we will try to always participate on their terms. So one of the things that we have done is kind of with the Open Compute project is we have designed a rack that kind of is inspired by the Open Compute project. And, we tried to work with the OCP on how do we do a submission and kind of, do that whole process. And, at times it can be like moving the goalpost or get moved as we go through the contribution process. We're like, well, you started and we said we could do this, and now you said we can't do that. We're like, yeah. And so it does get to be a challenge kind of navigating kind of the communities, but, we definitely try and embrace kind of the openness and getting back to the community, and so I think that's very crucial. But we have to look at each community independently and say, all right, look, the fact that OpenStack does it this way doesn't really have any impact on how any other kind of community does it. And so, oftentimes we hear, kind of, you go to like kind of Cloud Foundry meetups, and they're like, how do we not be like OpenStack? And it's kind of the governance model and kind of the pluses and minuses, and it's a very, kind of, diverse landscape. And you see projects like Kubernetes and Mesos and Docker, and yes, they're all open source, but they all have very different communities, and you have to understand that kind of ecosystem and say, all right, kind of Kubernetes is, backed by Google, and it has kind of a strong, but yes, there are other people contributing. Kind of Mesos, you have a lot of users contributing. You saw today, kind of Mesosphere is open sourcing their DCLS. This is a great thing. This is, a positive thing. And you see like Docker, and there's a community of kind of folks around Docker, but it's largely dominated by the Docker kind of company. But what you see is there's been a lot of pressure towards kind of the Open Container Initiative and really being able to kind of standardize, all right, what is AppC and OneC and get this standardization. And I think these are all kind of very good things, but again, it's just such a varied ecosystem. It's a challenge for us, like, hey, we want to go do this. All right, well, what's the best way to do it? Take a step back, pause, all right, what is the ecosystem, survey it, and try to understand what's the best way to engage with the community.
So from your, I know you're obviously deeply involved in Calista, so from an insider and an outsider's perspective, what do you see as, the good and bad? What would you recommend to somebody?
Well, kind of to tail on to some of the things Justin said, we see a lot of cross-pollination between communities, and where we can adopt best practices or standards from one community rather than to go reinvent that wheel in OpenPOWER is critical for us. We see participation across the huge spectrum from the spectators on one end who are just watching to see what we're doing, to consumers, to technology providers and software providers who want to engage at different levels. Right. And that's fine. I think each of these communities is evolving and maturing at their own rate and pace. I mean, for us, we're only a few years old, so we took a lot of the best practices from across the industry and applied them to what we're doing, right. Apache licensing and other licensing for IP, and tried to adopt those types of processes so that we don't have to, invent some new bureaucracy to participate. And I think that's pretty critical, and we're doing it, not only within OpenPOWER, but across, together with Open Compute, together with OpenStack, so that we, invent it once somewhere meaningful, and you can leverage it across multiple places. Right. So, I think it's a mixed model. I think that it is, once you sort of get involved and engaged, it's more helpful than cumbersome. Right. And I think that remains a critical piece as we run these foundations to make sure that we don't start tripping over ourselves. Right.
How about you, Okay? What would you say about that? I mean, you can, and feel free to pick and choose something that's important to you about the relationship or about working in a foundation or whatever.
But yeah, I mean, for Digital Realty Trust, you know, it really comes down to, right, what the enterprise users need, right? So what we're seeing is, at least step one is understanding, okay, is this going to help address a business challenge we have, right? Once they've answered that question, step two is, okay, how can we start going down the road of integrating or adopting open? So, you know, what I've seen is more so taking an existing, you know, 19-inch rack and modifying it such that it kind of complies with the open compute rack, right? Once they've done that, they get some adoption from the rest of the stakeholders in the business. Then next step is, all right, are we looking at going with a full OCP 2.0 cabinet? Is it going to be I think it's called the triplet or something to that effect. So once they get to that point, then it's a conversation with us, okay, about how can we integrate this, you know, architecture into a data center, right? Fact of the matter is, it's some of our facilities we can support them. I mean, we have to take into consideration, you know, a fully loaded OCP rack is going to be anywhere from 2,200 pounds to, I think, 5,000 if it's a triple, right? So, you know, we got to take that into consideration. For some clients, they understand. I think your average client understands that, right? And then we also want to make sure that these facilities can accommodate the height requirements for these cabinets. I think they're around anywhere 7 to 8 feet, I think, to start. And then, again, ramps and things of that nature. And then kind of go from there. I mean, there are, you know, again, we want to be, from our perspective, we want to be a part of the community, or for enterprises that are part of a community, ensure that we have solutions that can kind of meet their needs. But we're not going to address all of them, because there's certain aspects along the lines of cooling that, you know, for us, the average customer we're dealing with, they walk into a data center, if they don't see raised floor, they're like, oh, this isn't going to work. So, you know, there are areas where we're not going to be able to check every box off for them, but we want to be able to show clients that, you know what, if this is what you need, this is how we can accommodate you, and these are the facilities we can make those accommodations at.
Right. Yeah, an unfortunate truth about the colo and data center market is that oftentimes you still have to build using the lowest common denominator. So, Grant, a little bit of a different entry point, and then feel free to take it any way you want, but I think today, it was either today or last night, they announced the agreement from CoreOS and Docker on the 2.2 standard for the image. It seems to me like that's a real positive, right, from that particular organization and effort. You know, what would you say to expand on that, and have you seen other examples that make you smile at least?
So yeah, no, you know, they're announced standards and then they're implemented standards. So I always, you know,
sure, take the icing off the cake. Go ahead. Jesus.
So, you know, I think the proof is in the pudding. I mean,
right.
You know, in the early days of virtualization, there was a format that came up. Almost nobody adopted it.
Yeah.
So I think the proof is in the adoption, and this is sort of about the open source process, and it's about adoption, it's about contribution, and it's about sort of a massively democratic process.
Right.
So, you know, I think that it's tremendous that the community came together, because I think the advantages of scaling using containers is tremendous. If we manage to agree on a standard format. So I think it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, awesome. So, you know, speaking for you guys at Bloomberg, you know, I understand I think I understand the broad scope associated with your first answer about the adoption and use of open standards, but would you say that strategy applies to almost any organization, or does the scale and demand really help to support that kind of effort? In other words, right, I mean, I can take a bunch of parts if I'm a professional mechanic and I've got a team and I've got a lift and I've got all the right tools, and I can take apart my car and put it back together in 2 days, but if I'm just average everyday Joe driver, that may not be the way I should build my car.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the challenges, is, particularly on the software side, even on the hardware side, you know, when we look at a lot of these open standards, you know, Bloomberg has a lot of somewhat unique kind of perspective on availability and reliability that many other organizations don't take. And what you tend to see when we contribute to open source projects that are open standards, it's around kind of how do I make this more available? How do I make this kind of more reliable? And, you know, we do take a look at, yes, you know, could we have built our own cloud from scratch? Absolutely, but what we saw was kind of OpenStack was a starting point for us to be able to say, okay, let's now go spend time thinking about the availability and reliability of the OpenStack kind of software stack to make it as bulletproof as we possibly could, you know, at that time. And then what we said was, okay, let's go do all this work. Then we kind of took a look around and like, nobody else is thinking about this yet. Well, what do we do with it? And what we wanted to do, because we were hearing a lot of people say, oh, you can't deploy OpenStack. You can't go do these things. We're like, you know what, we're going to go put it up on GitHub. And so kind of about 3 years ago, we went to kind of the OpenStack Summit and did a keynote, and we're like, we put our, how we deploy our clusters up on GitHub. And it wasn't necessarily we welcome pull requests from other folks, but we wanted a proof point to basically say, yes, you can deploy OpenStack in a highly available way. Similarly, I talked about our racks, and we took a look at the Open Rack standard kind of from Facebook, and we're working with John and Steve and kind of the rest of our data center team, and we're like, you know what, we need this or that. We need to make it, fit in our footprint. It needs to have chimney containment. How do we go do these things? We're like, all right, let's go work with kind of our partner AFCO on creating a rack that would meet our specification, and let's give that back. And that's kind of the things that we think about was, we look at kind of the proliferation of racks, and some people are like, oh my, there's so many racks to choose from. And the point was, well, the standard is the open rack. And we can then customize that, which we will always going to have to do for our environment. And so I think this is really kind of how we try and take it as it is, all right, what do we need to do to make it fit in our environment? And it's not necessarily Bloomberg. We are fortunate. We have 4,000 technologists. We can do some of this hard engineering work to go make it fit into kind of our environment and our constraint. And so then we say, all right, let's go contribute that back in the same spirit that it was kind of offered initially.
That makes sense. That's great. And I mean, I just as kind of an aside, there's been a couple of points made here, so it's not like I'm making this up on my own. But it does seem that the common theme and the good theme is that if you're going to participate, if you're going to try to get value, then you should be contributing as much as is possible. Obviously not everybody. If you're a three-person IT shop, which I've been in, it's pretty hard to say I'm contributing to OpenPOWER, right? But nonetheless. So Calista, I'm just going to throw nice words out there because I've said this to other people, but I really think IBM is doing some great things relative to not only talking open, but doing open and showing open. But from an OpenPOWER standpoint, who is the buyer for that, right? I mean, how easy, for lack of a better term, is it for the average Joe enterprise of 5,000 people or less? And I don't mean 5,000 people in IT like Bank of America, but I mean 5,000 people in the company to say I'm going to adopt OpenPOWER, right?
So it's a spectrum, and I think both Justin and Grant have sort of pointed to, where is the adoption starting and where is the participation starting. I mean, in our community, we've got, kind of IBM is pretty central to it because we've contributed, the base architecture, a lot of the reference designs, a lot of the how-tos, the best practices and code and developer resources, and we have to sort of build that sort of nucleus. Right. You start to scale that out into some of the, the very specific hardware optimizations and some of the other software providers who are participating as well. And some of those guys are pretty small. So how do you make that tangible and consumable for the full spectrum from, the large shops to the small? Is that you have to, put all of those developer resources, all of those tips and tricks out there, whether it's another technology provider that wants to sort of jump on the platform to diversify the architectures that they're able to serve, or it's an end user who is kicking the tires and considering bringing some of their workloads over onto Power. Right. IBM made a very strategic decision, sometimes debated, as we were earlier today, on shifting from big endian to little endian. so that you could easily port codes. And so sort of lowering the barrier to entry is key for not only the technology and software providers, but also the end users as well. And by doing that, I mean, we've started to grow our, take that community out a few more rings, and we've now got like 2,300 ISVs doing Linux on Power that weren't there before.
Right.
And getting that broader community, to me, it's not an ecosystem. It's a community that really is investing in it, that's really sort of in there to, to give back and to make this, sort of a valid play for their business. And that valid play needs to be for, that end user adoption.
Right.
So you asked me, well, who's adopting? For us, we saw the early stakeholders in hyperscale and cloud service providers. I mean, Google and Rackspace have been, sort of part of that forum. OVH and Online.net have been sort of in the cloud side of things. We've got POCs running, especially now on some of our open compute stuff that we're doing, across most of the major hyperscales. And that's a statement not just in North America, but in China as well, and also in Europe. So we're starting to see some of that global traction in that space. The second area that we're really seeing a lot of traction is in high-performance computing. And I would assert that high-performance computing is starting to get much more specific. We're getting into genomics, personalized medicine, oil and gas, some of the financial services
More mainstream.
areas.
I mean, it's more specific, but it's actually more mainstream.
Exactly. It's a little more HPC for everyone.
Right.
I mean, everyone's starting to kind of morph into high-performance analytics. That's getting into predictive analytics, which is starting to bleed into something IBM likes to call cognitive. So we're starting to get into machine learning and some of those implementations, and that's really been boosted by a huge focus that we have on acceleration. Power is able to deliver on both GPU acceleration, especially now pulling NVLink directly to the CPU, between the CPU and GPU rather than just between the GPUs. And we're also doing that through another high-speed interconnect called CAPI that we're able to do for FPGA acceleration. So we've got all these acceleration options that are really compelling for HPC, and we've got a number of big wins with government labs in the US and the UK and a lot of different research projects going on. But the hallowed halls of scientific research are now going mainstream, and so that's really exciting. The third area that I would say for adoption is more of the domestic IT agendas. I mean, we've had a huge footprint in China. We've got about 20% of our members are there. And that's sort of full spectrum. That's, they want to invent it, produce it, and consume it, all within their borders. Well, that's sort of a priority that we're seeing in Europe, too. In Europe, you have different regulations around data provenance, and, in some cases, it's by country. In other cases, it's to the parking lot.
Right.
I mean, your data cannot leave the building or the property. But those, even in those environments, they're still, beholden to other regulations going on, other global events going on, and so you have to sort of help to manage and mitigate some of those concerns.
Right.
So that, those domestic IT agendas are getting more personal and starting to bleed more into the mainstream, more into enterprise.
Cool. All right, fantastic. So, okay. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, maybe not everybody knows this, but I've spent a lot of time in your line of work.
Yes, sir.
And, when I think about the potential impact of technology on the data center design, certainly I think of some of the same things that you already mentioned. How does a company like DRT, I mean, you guys have enormous scale, enormous distribution, and much of what you have has not been organic, but rather acquired growth. So that seems to be a major hurdle. What are you guys doing internally to try to maximize the use of your internal resource, knowing that some of that resource is problematic? I mean, from a raised floor standpoint, most raised floor is 2,400 pounds per square foot. And you can upgrade it, obviously, but that's expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. I mean, look, I think if you talk to anyone at Digital, one of our core tenets is efficiency, right? Because if we can operate our data centers efficiently, right, it helps the bottom line of the business, but more importantly, those are savings or benefits we can pass on to customers, right? So as far as what we're doing to improve efficiency is always constantly evaluating various facilities to ensure that we're utilizing energy efficiently, if there are ways we can encourage customers to, potentially, we'll work with customers to analyze their usage needs and see if there are ways they can consolidate down the footprint. It's as simple as maybe looking at the layout and figuring out, okay, we've got some underpopulated cabinets here, some hotspots here. Let's see if we can kind of move things around. And then it's always going to be, facilities guys, construction and engineering, kind of looking at where the industry is going and what our customers are doing, and then, taking a look and saying, okay, do we need to do, an augment at a facility to be able to support higher loads from a floor perspective? Do we need to add, additional cooling at a facility because we're seeing more demand for high density footprints and things of that nature? So we're always looking at, again, I don't think digital's ever been one to stand on their laurels, right? So we're always looking at ways to kind of improve efficiency.
Cool. All right, makes sense. So I was told probably almost 5 minutes ago now that I would have 5 minutes. So I have to end with my last question to Grant. But Grant, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, and if you had to pick one thing about using open in an environment that's not all open, that has maybe some standards that still came out of what the Navy used in World War II in some data centers and environments, what do you see as both the biggest opportunity or maybe the biggest risk?
So I think the open source in general is a tremendous opportunity. And what it's really, taking a step back for a second and mindful of time,
Yep.
since we're standing between drinks for most of these people, it's about driving innovation and taking risks. So what you want to do is you want to look at projects that you can consume yourself, that you can contribute with and contribute to in various ways to help drive the platform. So, for example, we were an early adopter of Linux in 2000, even 1999. And so we had tremendous Linux population. And at that point, we weren't really contributing as far as code, but we were contributing because we were deploying it in a large scale, and we were hitting every single problem that you could possibly have.
Right.
And so you have to think about sort of how you do this along the way. I think there's, the path for many of the entrepreneurs is through the open source, through the model. And so what we have to do is just sort of watch the projects that we think are really significant. We need to consume them. We need to figure a way to consume them. And also we need to, of course, figure the right level of contribution. Like, for example, on power, I don't believe we have anyone in our staff who's a CPU designer.
Right.
But on the other hand, when we choose to adopt power, I didn't say if, I said when.
It's a good day.
So when we think about things like that, our contribution will be, bringing it into a large enterprise, understanding how it runs, how it coexists with a large sort of infrastructure which has a lot of legacy.
Right.
So I think it's a tough question to ask because the risks are the things you don't see.
Yep.
And so, we kind of see everything that we can, but certainly there are some risks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So,
Okay.
Bruce, do we have time for even one question?
It's beer o'clock.
Beer o'clock. All right. Well, thank you very much. And
Yeah,
thank you
we're
for
here if
coming
you
on.
need us.
Thank you.
There it is.
All right. So one question then. Anyone?
Which way is it?
Yes, good question.
Not that way.
Great. Thanks, folks.